So this is where you were hanging out last week and 150 years ago. You know, we could have used you up in Huntsville. Had a little bit going on, but no, where were you all down here hanging? We had a little invasion on April 11th, 150 years ago. Could have used a little help. But, all right. My name is Mary Jane Chadick. I'm from Huntsville. Not originally, but that's where we start our story with today. Let's see. Oh, you have been to Huntsville, haven't you? You've seen our wonderful depot, the new depot. We have 3 or 4 new wonderful churches downtown on the square, probably like your downtown had a square. If you haven't been in a while, do come back. You're going to be pleased. But Huntsville had this invasion. Oh, my. Everything's going to change, as you can imagine. And I was married to Reverend W.D. Chadick. Now, W.D. was a wonderful Cumberland Presbyterian minister, but at the start of the war, he was called to action, and all of a sudden, before our very eyes, he became Colonel Chadick. Oh, that changes everything for me and the 8 children who live on Randolph Street. And then to add to our dismay, one of the children, Davy, had gone up to visit his grandparents in Lebanon, Tennessee. Well, the timing was very bad, and we hadn't seen Davy in quite a few years, as it turned out. So I had to worry about that. But I do want you to know that I taught school, and all good school lessons start with the new vocabulary. You do know the vocabulary words, and I wanted to make sure we were talking about the same things, perhaps. Let's see. Folks knew about my writing a long while. However, they called it a diary, and I think we want to make clear that a diary is an emotional input, perhaps, the 16-year-old girl keeps. But this is a journal, begun the evening of the day that the federal troops under General Mitchell invaded our town. This is a journal as I saw it, as it was written. Now, you also might have known about the use of the word impressment. You're thinking wisely. The War of 1812, an impressment of our sailors, by the British particularly. But during the Civil War, impressment meant that either side could take anything you had, your food, your corn, your mules, your servants, your house, and use it. So either side has this, and they called it impressment of your goods. And then you all may think you invented the word embedded reporter during your recent wars, but you can see that we have our own embedded reporters, can't you? Yes. They were there to tell the story, to write the story, and to show the story, as embedded reporters could. Then the last new word I'd like to mention, well, we should be a little discreet here. No, we're all grown-ups. You do know what a chamber pot is. Okay, you know, all right. Well, let me go on with the story. Huntsville, 1862, the war had been going on for a year, and actually the only folks in town were the elderly, the women, the children, and the invalid. The men had all gone off to do what they did, fight in the war, but it left a town that had been 4,000 people divided already in nature. Now, with all the men going away, and I can see that you women would understand, this now becomes a woman's war when the invasion comes. And if Huntsville had a population of, at the start, of 4,000 citizens, 4,000 people, 2,000 black, 2,000 white, that just as the 2,000 on one hand were excited and fearful and alarmed at what was happening, that on the other hand, the other 2,000 were just as excited and fearful, maybe that something wasn't going to happen. So we have to look at it that way, I hope, that there are many sides, many complications. And you think, why in the world would they want to come to Huntsville, Alabama? Well, of course, remember, I'm the teacher. The 3 R's, the river, the railroad, and the road to Atlanta. And Huntsville was in the way. Along they would come. Several times Huntsville was invaded twice. Came and went. I saw at least 10 Yankee generals in Huntsville, Alabama. Even sat to dinner with some of them. 400,000 men probably marched through or took the train cars in and out of Huntsville, Alabama. Some of them more than once, to their dismay. We were occupied the 2 times, but we waited for fearless Roddy and gallant General Forrest to rescue us. But it didn't happen right away. You see, we were all prisoners of hope. As anxiety took over, and it did, we did what Southern ladies often do so well. When it's more than you can handle, what would a lady like to do today? Of course, have a genteel swoon and perhaps take to her bed. I did, and I noticed as my journal recorded it that I was doing this more and more frequently. No one seemed to take notice of it but me, but I noticed it was happening. In my recollections, there are only 2 blank places. I'm so sorry to note that, and some of you will note in the Valley of Years that we don't remember as well as we used to. In the journal, it says, a little excitement around the house today, occasioned by Billy finding in the front yard. Well, don't look at me for an answer. I can't remember either. But what was so appalling, what would Billy have found that I couldn't bring my fingers, genteel as they are, to have written down? Your guess. Ponder that on your way home. What was in our front yard? I don't know. And then the only other blank is about Betty G. And I wish today that I had written then Betty G's last name, because we're never going to know who Betty G was. Well, there's no real news in town. Just rumor, rumor, rumor with her 1,000 tongues. But I can tell you that I heard the artillery being fired in Decatur, and I could see the flames as the Yankees burned Whitesburg, leaving the women and the children houseless and homeless. I would like to share, though, and with the journal, how I learned more than I knew about what I didn't quite know. How attitudes changed, and they did change. And I would like to suggest that the women perhaps had to change more than the men who had gone off valiantly to fight. One of my changes of thought regarded the issue of our servants, and I never called them slaves. They were servants. When little baby John got sick, we called in 2 doctors for baby John. He died, not quite a year old. And I wrote in my journal, "We shall miss him dearly," perhaps words that were affectionate of our family feeling at the time. However, as the war continued on, in July 14th, such a scene. Whilst the Negroes were all assembled at church, and I underlined at church, the Yankees surrounded the building, and as the men came out, seized them. Such a scare it gives them. Some got away and succeeded in hiding from the pursuers. Others were run down by those on horseback. The black women were running in every direction, hunting their husbands and children. It really is heart-rending to a looker-on. These are their friends, the abolitionists. And yet later I was able to write, there is a powerful charm in the word freedom. Life went on. We did without. We did the best we could. Oh my, we did. Young Eddie's my stepson, and he decided he also could do his share, and he joined up with the lifeguards, and it was all right because they were the finest boys in town. And off they went. Eddie'd been in the Army 4 days when he was captured. Yes, unfortunately. Off he went to Camp Chase, where the prisoners were taken, and that wasn't good. We knew that at Camp Chase, neither a dog or a rat escaped alive. Eddie wrote one letter back. Oh, he promised. He'd never known how difficult it was. But if he lived long enough and was allowed to get back home, he promised to be a good boy after that. Oh, mothers everywhere, does that not do your heart good? that he promised to be, a good boy after that. Well, goodness. Let's see what else the journal will tell us today. Some of it may be new to me, too. Oh, yes. I said that the Yankees had come twice. On one occasion, my husband, remember now the Colonel, had returned and was having dinner with us in the Yankees' absence, when all of a sudden the servant came in and announced the Yankees were coming. My husband got up from the table, ran across the street, another street, and up the hill to a house still standing today, where Mrs. Mayhew very cleverly knew what was happening, hiding him in the basement, where she put a little piece of rug over the trap door, rolled a barrel over that, and sat quietly in the living room. Oh, I didn't know where he'd gone, and neither did the other children, but my stepdaughter, Sue, decided she would save the family, and she got the pistol from the chest of drawers and shot herself in the hand. Did I not have enough to worry about? I still didn't know where W.D. was. But I did know that sitting on the back of the chair was Colonel Chadick's jacket. And if he were caught now out of uniform, that he could be hanged or shot as a spy. It was very important to get that jacket to him, to get him out of town if we could. And that afternoon, late as it was, and I was so anxious, so fretful, what should we do? Betty G. came down. Betty G. came visiting, and Betty G. was wearing a hoop skirt. Ladies, some of you know that hoop skirts were really going out of style by then, but there was Betty G. in her hoop skirt. And she knew where my husband, the Colonel, was. So we took his jacket off the back of the chair and hung the Colonel's jacket up under Betty G.'s skirt, and she sashayed, if you will, up to Mrs. Mayhew's, and later that evening, the jacket was returned to my husband, and in the thundering rainstorm, he made his way down to the Tennessee River and across into Dixie. Did I not have enough to worry about? The next day, I took to my bed again. Of course. Well, let's see what else is going on in town. Oh, not all good. You know, there were ladies in town. Well, no, let me rephrase that. There were women in town who were not all ladies. And between robbing and thieving and murdering, they will give the North a glorious name in history. Houses that have been occupied by officers and their reputed wives have been completely plundered. At Mr. Robert Watkins' china plate, bedding, even the pillowcases from off the bed. Why would they want the pillowcases, you might wonder? Off they went. My goodness, and the latter gentleman's clothing, all packed up and carried away. Captain Allen, who was quartermaster, who occupied the house of Mrs. Whedon, carried off, among other things, 2 china chamber pots. His name has therefore been immortalized by all the ladies in town when looking under the bed for that article. They ask, "Where's Captain Allen? Where's Captain Allen?" Now, don't you know that up there someplace in Ohio land, sitting on a mantel, are 2 china chamber pots? They have no idea how those chamber pots got there. But we know, don't we? Oh, yes, Captain Allen. Let me tell you also then about when Davy came back. We weren't sure. Had a complete, joyful surprise August 6th, 1864. This evening, in the arrival of my long-absent little Davy and sister Julia, he'd been absent nearly 3 years. A beautiful boy, has grown very much and hardly knew his mother and sisters and brothers. Oh, we enjoyed his visit. 2 or 3 days later, we had entertainments. We had little skits on the front porch. And we took down the curtains on the side and had the skits out there and invited all the neighbors in for watermelon. You would have done that too. But that night, little Davy cried because Sister Julia was going back to Lebanon and Davy was staying. And he wanted to go with her, of course. We weren't going to be set aside. No, not here. September 4th, 1864. I passed a sleepless night. My nervous system was excited to the utmost pitch, caused by alternate emotions of hope and fear. By 8 o'clock, we were ready. Let's see. I'd sent word down to the river, to WD, that we were coming. Put a silk handkerchief, 2 cigars in my pocket, and took a bottle of homemade wine. Now remember, they're not Baptists, they're Cumberland Presbyterians, as tokens of remembrance to my dear, and we were off by 9 o'clock to the river, 10 miles distance. My heart did flutter and tremble with fear. I did not have a pass. I had not seen him in long 10 months, and I took little Davy with us, whom he had not seen in 2.5 years. At the river, a gunboat passed. I'd never seen one before, and it reminded me of the pictures I'd seen in Roman history. Soon we clasped each other's in each other's arms. We looked. Oh, it was wonderful to see a gray uniform again. And you must consider then that the Tennessee River was thought of as Dixie. And if you crossed into Dixie, you were safe for a while. The men could yell back and forth. They could talk to each other, the 2 different sides, north and south. The war continued on, as you know. We had news from the Galt House at Louisville. Let's see, former residents had gone there. Judge George Washington Lane had an appointment as a federal judge. We begged him not to go, but off he went. Unfortunately, the judge did not make it and died along the way. But Mrs. Lane, who was staying with her children at the Galt House, there was a fire there. You do remember the fire, some of you perhaps. Money, baggage, clothing, etc. Everything was lost for Mrs. Lane. Captain Allen, you remember Captain Allen. Captain Allen, who was quartermaster there last spring and who made himself so notorious, appropriating Southern furniture, etc., etc. He was also a great sufferer. His nose was burned off and his fingers to the second joint. He is prone in the hospital at that place in precarious condition. Surely there is retribution in this life. Proudly, I can say that's the fiercest I get. The war, however, continues. We'll go on up to April 1st, 1865. Heard that Richmond and Petersburg were evacuated and taken possession of by the Federal Army. The Yankees are perfectly jubilant over it, as we, of course, are not. Several ladies had to go to bed in consequence. For ourselves, we are not whipped yet, nor do we believe the Southern Confederacy is either. Just let a Yankee exult over me to the fall of Richmond and see if he don't catch it. I must apologize. That's the only time I use slang in the whole journal. Hark! Oh, don't you just love that word, hark? Hark! A cannon is booming from the fort. 1, 2, 3, 4, 100 guns and shots should have been fired in honor of the momentous event, yet they should have fired 1,000 after nearly 4 years of struggle, toil, expenditure, and slaughter to obtain it. The times weren't good. We knew. Did I tell you on the occasion when 17,000 Yankee soldiers were preparing to leave town and they had got their extra rations? Mary Jane, went on down to the river, remember where Dixie is on the other side, and I visited across the river. Now you might wonder how I got across the river. Well, I went at least twice because I wrote it in my journal. In a canoe. Twice. Not in the hoop skirt, of course, in case you were worried. Twice. So you know that I visited with my husband, and so that you know I had information from town about the 17,000 troops about to move in, or move out. At that moment, as I told my husband, in uniform, was I not a spy also? No wonder I took to my bed a few times. Yes. Things went on. the canoe trip. I had boarders. Everybody had to take boarders. That wasn't all bad because they brought in food supplies, as the boarders did. One of the boarders was the paymaster from the group in Pennsylvania. And one Saturday morning, I awoke to find 2 cannon in the front yard. Our boarder, the paymaster from Pennsylvania, sat at a table in the front on the porch with 2 loaded pistols on the table. This may sound familiar to some of you gentlemen who've been in later wars. It was payday. And that day on my front porch in the little house in Huntsville that's no longer standing, they paid out $60,000 in cash to the soldiers. Oh, there was a good time in town that night. Oh, there was a good time in town many nights. Every corner had an armed guard. We who did not pledge the oath of allegiance to the United States were not allowed to go past these pickets, nor could the people from the county come in without pledging the oath of allegiance. The children weren't even allowed to go out and pick pecans in the fall of the season. That doesn't seem right, does it? Unless I or their oldest brother would sign the oath of allegiance. We were forbidden to do that. Life went on. We did the best we could. We did everything we could. I can tell you that I won't have time, and I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable with too much. Sue, you remember Sue who shot her hand. One of the boarders in the house 3 houses up was a 6'2", steely, blue-eyed, handsome Captain Fordyce. And he and Sue struck up a friendship, as Southern girls sometimes did. Took me a little while to catch on why Captain Fordyce kept coming by our house and leaving ladies' magazines for the girls to read. It was okay. They would get married later on after the war. Life was so complicated. You can't spend all your time in bed, but with the servants gone, you see, we had to take over the duties of all the things that some of us didn't know how to do very well. Couldn't make a biscuit. I was the only one of the 4 girls who could make a biscuit worth anything. I had to take in sewing. I could only really do fancy work. That was what I did best, but it was a little bit of money. One of my neighbors brought in milk from her cow. They hadn't stolen her cow. She kept having babies, and they had to keep the cow milk. By that time, she was not well enough to have her own milk. The smokehouse was robbed a few times. Oh, a rock, little Georgie it was hit in the head with a rock. And from the symptoms that I've written and read later on, Georgie had a concussion, there was no doubt. But I treated that with the poultice from the slippery elm tree, and he did get better. But these were bad times. You know the ending, of course. Let me read on from my journal. April 14th, 1865. The firing had commenced. Cannons are booming from the fort. The brass band is playing. The church bells are ringing. Railroad engines are shrieking out a prolonged, doleful whistle. And the confusion is worse than confounded. And all they say for the surrender of General Lee and that of the Northern Army of Virginia. The boys have gone up to the housetops, and the dogs have come into the house trembling with fear. Every boom comes to our ears like a knell, recalling our wandering thought for General Lee and that noble and devoted band of Southern soldiers. A few days, it's quiet. May 18th. You know, the times are not going to be good. May 18th. It's over. Matt Steele came by tonight. We saw him as he passed, and we ran out to inquire of W.D. Knew nothing about it. Where could he be? Some say he's gone across to Mississippi. I don't believe that, but I feel anxious and impatient for his return. Many gray jackets were returning. May 21st, Mrs. Madkin came to spend a few days. After dinner, We went to the square and went shopping. Well, of course, it was the first time they could buy anything without signing the oath. Saw several returned soldiers, but I could learn nothing of my best friend. I challenge some of you to think of your husband of these years as still your best friend. May 22nd. Jim Matt Robinson called this morning, but he had no news from WD. How anxious I feel. And though I never wrote it, I wrote that he might be sick. I wrote that he might be injured. I never wrote those worst fears. But I didn't know. I just didn't write it. Perhaps he is ill. The soldiers are still coming in every day, and the war begins to seem like a frightful dream. We have no news still. We'd heard of the assassination of President Lincoln, and we knew that things would be even worse for the South. However, May 26th, 1865, a memorable day, for with it ends all my suspense and anxiety with regard to the absent ones. Soon after the whistle of the evening trains, Sue came in and said, Ma, you remember Sue is the one that's Ma, Eddie has come in and he's on his way here in the omnibus. I bet you didn't even know we had an omnibus, but we did. It was no surprise as we were looking for him, but we were not looking for W.D., underlined, who got out of the omnibus at the same time to our very great surprise, underlined. The meeting was one of great joy, mixed with sadness when we thought of the painful weeks and months of separation borne with patience and fortitude for the sake of the cause. And cause is capitalized. And then the unfortunate results. The war being over and the dear ones returned, there will be little more of interest for these pages. Therefore you and I, dear journal, close friends as we have been, united by every bond of sympathy, must part. We have shared each other's gladness and wept each other's tears. Whenever my eyes rest upon you, it will be with feelings of gratitude and affection for the consolation you have afforded me in these days of trial. Farewell. It's a little early. Does that leave time for any questions, if anyone had? I don't make anything up, by the way. It was all researched. It was a delight. We were able to identify 99% of the people mentioned. Whoever Betty G is, I even looked at all the Elizabeths and the Betsy's in the census, but we could not identify her. But we could identify, I can tell you the rank and serial number of Captain Allen and what division he was with in Ohio. Any questions?
If you have a question, please raise your hand and we will get a microphone to you to speak into so that the people in the other room or on the video can hear your question.
It's pretty clear cut. They know who won and who lost. Doesn't take rocket science to...
Yes, ma'am. Did her husband make it back on?
Yes, it is W.D. who gets off the omnibus. Everything is racked to ruin. The church can't support him. They have 8 children. He tries farming for a while, tries mercantile business for a while, and his favorite daughter. Oh, I didn't tell you about Mary sitting on the general's lap to eat watermelon. Mary is 8, his songbird, and after the war she dies. But during one of the occasions when Mrs. Chadick went to get a pass, you wouldn't go out by yourself, so she took then 5-year-old Mary, yes, or was it Claire? Claire. And they're invited, you to knock on the flap of the tent to go in. You see, the rules of warfare have changed a lot. And so the general, it was Buell, invited her in. And he was eating and finishing his lunch. He was eating watermelon. And he offered Claire a bite of his watermelon, which he cut off with his knife and spread his handkerchief on little Claire's lap while she ate the watermelon from General Buell. Yes.
Could you say something about how the diary survived and how you discovered it?
The diary, wrong choice in my opinion. That's what it was called, and it was known for a long time. The Huntsville Times reissued it in a typed version from a WPA worker in 1932, and there were a lot of errors in it. And so what we did, and then it was reprinted in the Historical Society's journal and used. It was quoted a lot. I can tell you what they ate, what they didn't eat, the feigned attack on Huntsville. And, she knew not to leave the house. She sent the children out, but she did not leave her house, that it would be taken. So it was called a diary and used often, and I decided that, with a little urging, to go find the original. Her daughter Sue does marry Captain Fordyce, and he is a phenomenal person in Arkansas. There's Fordyce, Arkansas. He goes to the Springs. He's quite ill after the war. And Mary Jane lives with the Fordyces for a while, and her journal she wrote that night. There was no doubt, and she never admitted she cried until the last page. She tells us what she was reading, for instance, or what the lessons were that the children were taking. And it's all good stuff. You couldn't make it up. It was better than that. Any other? Well, I hope you have an appreciation as it is.
Could you give us some insight into why the Union soldiers attacked the servants who were at church?
You see, they wanted the workforce. They're only taking, this is an impressment of the slaves. And they took them wherever they could get them, but it was better to go get a group of them at the church service. And so on one occasion when they thought Huntsville was going to be attacked, they built a fort on the top of the hill. Well, you know the merchants weren't going to dig the trenches and the ditches to start the fort. It was very common, and as the last months of the war are on, there is a contraband or an impressed group of black men, workers, up at Governor Chapman's property at the edge of town, 500 of them, who were taken, if you will, from someone else. The women, all her servants go. Without the male figure in the house, her authority is weak. And they are listening to the federal officers who say, come and work for me if you like. I'm up at the hotel. You can be a laundress. You can be my cook. You can wait on me. You can take care of my horses. And so if they were impressed to build the fort, many just fled. Corina fled because her son Jim wanted to go take lessons in learning to read and write. And Mrs. Chadick, forbid him to do that. And so Corina just went to the hotel, got a job as a washerwoman, and young Jim learned to read and write, one hopes. Anyway.
You mentioned that your husband was a Presbyterian minister. Would he have had any interest or knowledge or association with Hiawassee College?
Not, to my knowledge, W.D., and he's a Cumberland Presbyterian minister, a whole different rank, if you will. She met him in Lebanon. There was a typhoid, I think, or yellow fever, whatever, epidemic, and he was already widowed. He had these 4 children. And she also came over from the house across the street and tended to these ill people, including her future husband. And he traveled in his ministerial duties. His first wife was buried right up from us in Fayetteville, Tennessee. And so he has the 4, and then they have 4 children together. And Lebanon, he goes on to several other church positions later. He does not last a long time, and he's buried in McMinnville, Tennessee. Yes?
Do you have other presentations like the one you gave today?
Fortunately, yes and no. None others in the outfit.
I was wondering if you would come back and give us another one.
Oh, of course. If you haven't heard about Mary Lewis and her trip from Huntsville in 1842 to Paris, France. Oh, you do need to know, and I can come. Oh, yes. Think about the route from Huntsville to Paris in 1842. You go up to Pulaski Pike and turn left. It was that. Once she got there, she wasn't sure she liked it because they had naked statues on every corner, and there were no naked statues, I'm sorry to digress, in Huntsville, Alabama. We still don't have any naked statues to my knowledge in Huntsville, but yes. And so the book is available only in archives and libraries. It's not published anymore, but it's all there. Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you.
When did it end up? When did she close it out?
Oh, right there. That farewell was farewell. She never picked it up the day he came home.
And I was wondering about her feelings about the Yankees in general. What did she?
She's angry at being invaded. She's angry at the drunk soldiers. She's angry or excited about whatever that fool thing was in the yard. I don't know what it was. She mentions drunk soldiers. She mentions robbery and the ladies who are bad, and that some of the, allegedly bad, and that some of the girls are taking up with Yankee soldiers. At first, that's very bad, bad, bad. And she does not know, when this is written, that Sue is going to marry Mr. Fordyce. She just knows that he is a kind, thoughtful officer who is bringing magazines. But remember, in a town where there aren't a lot of men, and you want to meet the ladies of town. That's a thing we do. Yeah. Well, thank you for listening to Mary Jane. If there are no other questions. Thank you.